Devin Best spoke at last year's Dreaming the Salinas program, so welcome back. We're glad to see you again. He's a natural resource management specialist in the Protected Resources Division of the National Marine Fisheries Service. For the past year, he's been conducting consultations for federally funded bank stabilization projects, road building, pier construction, dam operations, land use development, and water rights that may affect federally listed salmonids within Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Luis Obispo counties. So a warm round of applause, please, for Devin, could we? Thank you for being here. And Robert Goodwin, who's waving at you now, brings 30-plus years of managerial experience to agricultural and environmental communities. After earning a degree in international business, Robert spent 10 years in the technology industry and then returned to agriculture in 1998, consulting on the Salinas Valley Water Project. In 2001, he founded the Cooper Land Corporation, which manages closely held prime agricultural ranches in the Blanco region of the Salinas Valley. He's currently developing cost-benefit models for integrating ecosystem services into the Salinas Valley agricultural land use. So a round of applause, please, for Robert, who goes by Rob, he told me. So I'm going to jump off the stage. They are going to make their presentations, and then if you were here for the earlier one, once again, when they open for Q&A, I'll become the microphone runner for you. Thanks so much.
Obviously, I'm not that tall. So my name is Devin Best, work for the National Marine Fisheries Service as a natural resource management specialist. Originally, I was from this area, San Luis Obispo, moved to Oregon for a number of years, and then moved back into California working in Santa Rosa, but my area is from Santa Cruz County all the way down to San Luis Obispo, and actually my cutoff area is the other side of the grade in the headwaters of the Salinas. Coming back into California, learned a lot about water rights, water quality issues, and was fortunate enough last year to connect with the Central Coast Pioneers, and honored again to be asked to come back and present once again. Last year we just kind of gave an overall of what the Salinas is to a lot of folks, and from that we kind of continued our discussion and talking more specifically about one issue, which is water quality. So you'll see up here, I'm actually going to kind of be trying to do two roles. I'm going to be playing the National Marine Fisheries Service as well as the water quality expert, which I'm not. I just know enough to be dangerous, but I will try and give those who aren't familiar with water quality, the Water Quality Act in California, a little overview of that, and kind of framing mostly for my fellow panelists here to sort of demonstrate how you actually deal with a lot of these environmental regulatory policies we have on a federal level as well as a state level. So as you'll see, let's see, how does this work? Perfect. With the laser, do I point on the monitor, or do I have to actually lean over and point towards the screen? Yeah, I'll just kind of talk generally here, but here's a picture that was taken. This is actually of the Salinas River, just kind of south of the city of Salinas. And the reason I brought this up was you can see that there's a lot of things that are going on in this one picture. You see a lot of row crops that are occurring on one side of the river, and then on the other side you see sort of residential development that is occurring. And so there's these kind of dynamic forces that are occurring on both sides of the river, and yet we're talking about water quality, and a lot of times we kind of focus on one aspect of land use and not the entire watershed itself. And so what I'm trying to do today is talk about, water quality as sort of the, I guess, the end point of what all the land use practices are. And when we look at water quality, we're actually looking at the entire watershed from one ridge to the other ridge, all the way up from the mouth to the headwaters. And so when we have issues with water quality, we're not just looking at one particular person right there next to the river. It's actually the entire watershed, kind of a cumulative effect that occurs. So it's a real balancing act. I mean, we start talking about trying to make improvements, and then you deal with it in permit applications, you deal with it on your own land use, we deal with it here within your own backyard. I mean, if you have a lawn, you're putting fertilizers on it. If you wash your car, you use soap, laundry, your municipalities, meaning your sewer lines, septic systems. There's a lot of things that are going on. And water quality is one of those kind of contentious issues because no one really knows where exactly to pinpoint everything because it is so broad. So without further ado, I'll kind of go into what the Water Quality Act is. This was established in 1972, but there's actually several other acts that would preclude this. There's the Pollution Prevention Act, I believe in, it was the 1920s that was originally developed. The goal of that was to try and reduce pollution that was occurring within our waterways. Those acts have been kind of carried out through different policies and different actions all throughout the years, but the most recent one that we're working with is the Clean Water Act, and this was done in 1972. So for 40 years, this has been administered on the federal level. And the main goal is really trying to reduce pollutants into the waters of the United States and developing standards to try and do so. And it's to restore the chemical, physical, and biological components of those waterways. So when we talk about that, we're talking about nutrients, we're talking about the aquatic organisms that live there, physical processes that occur within a watershed itself. And this also is not just rivers, but this also applies to our lakes and ponds and those sort of things as well. And in order to do that, we need to find out which river systems are working, which ones aren't. And the process of doing that is called the 303D list. And which, at that point, what happens is there's a lot of information that's collected and sort of pinpoints what part of the river is not meeting certain criteria. There's a lot of acronyms, so believe me, if you guys get kind of glazed over after a while, don't feel bad. It's a lot of terms to know, and if you live and breathe it, it's easy to understand, but once you kind of step out of it, it's hard to keep up with all these terms. Then there's also the TMDL, which stands for the total maximum daily load, and that's just another way of setting kind of a basic standard of where we want to try and see to prevent water quality from from degrading. And this is more focused on kind of the point source and non-point source. So what we'll have is maybe heavy metals are an issue. And so we'll go in 303 delist this certain area for heavy metals, and then we start setting criteria on what we need to do to reduce those over a certain period of time. And then within that, it just keeps going further and further down the rabbit hole here, but then you start getting into permitting issues. I highlighted two that are kind of relevant to all of us. There's the point source, which is the National Pollution Discharge Elimination. I can't even remember them. I use acronyms so much I forget what they even stand for these days. These apply more to like your wastewater treatment plants, stormwater drains, much more of your point source, where we can actually go right to a point and say, we know the water quality is not adequate here. We need to apply a permit to actually go through and do some cleanup. Then you get into more of your non-point source, which is more of it's sort of ambiguous because we can't really go back and say, we know exactly where this discharge is or where this water quality parameter is declining. We just know that it's occurring somewhere in this general area. Right now, the most, I guess, politically or most high profile one is the ag order for the Central Coast. It's a big issue right now. It's gone back and forth. I think I got involved, I think my first couple months I was here, I came to San Luis Obispo for a public workshop thinking the ag order was going to be an easy meeting, and I think there was a turnout about, well, standing room only, basically. And there was a lot of issues that were being brought up about what the ag order is, how we're going to implement it, who's involved, who gets to have a say in it. And that's going to be something that's going to be kind of ongoing even now, because there's still a lot of issues to still work out with that as well. So, and hopefully today we can kind of just give you, like I said, sort of a framework of what are the big policies that are driving a lot of people, not just on the local level, but on the county level and even on the state level. So the next big piece here is what I actually deal with, which is the Endangered Species Act. My title is, as I said, Natural Resource Management Specialist, but I deal with steelhead primarily. I also deal with CCC coho, which are more in Santa Cruz area. This act was implemented in 1973. So shortly right after 1972, with the Clean Water Act, we put in the Endangered Species Act. And this is to actually protect all of our fauna and flora, our wildlife, our aquatic organisms, plants that we really like. And the main one that I deal with, as I said, was steelhead, and they were listed in California, or actually in the Federal Register in 1997. But the main purpose of this is to provide the the habitat conditions and to make sure that these species don't go extinct. So within the Clean Water Act, we have EPA who actually deals with the Clean Water Act. Then they actually have to branch that out and make sure that the things that they set as criteria, whether it's in a region or in a state, doesn't cause something to jeopardize the population. That's a common word in my agency, but meaning causing the species to decline to a point that it's no longer viable and it actually goes extinct. So my job is to protect them as much as I possibly can. And then, so up here I have listed EPA on the far left-hand side. That's the Environmental Protection Agency. So that's the federal government level. But in some states, EPA actually deals with all the water quality issues. They're the ones that set the criteria. They're the ones out collecting data. They set the 303D list, TMDL. They do all that piece. In this state, they actually administer their authority to the California State Water Resources Control Board. And if any of you have had to go and apply for a water right, you deal with them. Water rights are dealing with water quantity, not water quality. So what actually happens in the state of California is the State Water Resource Control Board gives their authority to local, smaller regional groups, which in here is the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. So that is who you actually deal with for a lot of your water quality issues that you have in the Central Coast. And I can't quite remember the entire region that they cover, but I think it's Santa Barbara to Santa Cruz County, something like that. I'm not quite sure. I'm seeing some head nods, so I'm pretty close. So here you see all the things that they're dealing with. The 303D list is sort of the beginning of developing what areas are problematic in a particular watershed or water body. Then they start developing TMDLs for those. Right now in the Salinas, there's 3 of them. There's pesticides, nutrients, and sediment that they've developed. I think 2 of those have been approved, and the other one's got a public workshop that's coming up. They also deal with the MPDS permits. They just recently dealt with the city of Salinas and their stormwater management program there, as well as dealing with like Paso Robles wastewater treatment plants, San Luis Obispo, all these sort of big, large municipalities. They have to get permits from the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board to meet the criteria for beneficial uses of those waterways. And also at the same time, this is where I come in, to make sure that their water quality standards meet what we need for fish, steelhead primarily. I think I was out in the field one day and trying to explain to somebody why we'd be so concerned about steelhead, and they spend a certain portion of their life in the freshwater, so they need adequate habitat conditions in order to live out their entire life cycle. And that's actually kind of the next slide here. As I said, they were listed in 1997 on a federal level. And this covers from California all the way up to Alaska, but it was confirmed in 2005, which I always kind of laugh because that kind of shows you how long it takes the federal government to get anything done. It takes about 8 years for us to say, yeah, we're right. We do believe they're actually threatened. Shortly after that, we had their habitat listed as critical habitat, as designated. That means all the components, whether it's including the substrate, the amount of water, the riparian vegetation, food sources, what they need to spawn, rear, all those sort of things were lumped in there. So that we now not only have the species protected, but also their habitat. And they're kind of two different parts of the ESA, the Endangered Species Act. And depending on what we're looking at and what we're dealing with, we kind of look at those different components and apply it to one particular action. Here's just a list of some of the beneficial uses in the Salinas. You can see, as I said before, there's a long laundry list of things that are going on. Again, going back to the first picture of land uses, you saw agriculture on one side, you saw residential on the other side, and then you look at all these things of where there's beneficial uses. So the layers just get more and more complex when you go and stand anywhere on a river system. You have to keep in mind, if you're looking at the river, there's all these things back behind you, upstream and downstream, that you have to keep in mind as far as trying to deal with how you go and make water quality improvements. Over here on the far right is a basic kind of cartoon representation of the steelhead life cycle. It's sort of the abridged version, but the main thing in here to point out is that they have two parts of their life. They live one part in freshwater, one part in saltwater. The freshwater component is what my agency really focuses on. I mean, we're called National Marine Fisheries Service, but in many ways for us, once our fish make it out to the ocean, we're kind of like, they're out, they're free, they're safe, hopefully they come back. We don't deal with a lot of commercial fisheries in the state of California as we do in Oregon or Washington or even Alaska. But we do have, and especially not for steelhead, there's no commercial fisheries for those species, but we do have commercial fisheries for Chinook if you're in the Central Valley. But as the fish come back from spending a couple of years in the saltwater, they come back in the freshwater and they migrate upstream to their spawning habitat. Here in the Salinas River, that spawning habitat is primarily the Rio Seco River, the Nacimiento River, the San Antonio, and the Upper Salinas, which is from the confluence of the Nacimiento River all the way up to the headwaters in Santa Margarita. So there's a lot of things from, I mean, we're talking 150 miles that these fish have to traverse just to get to their spawning habitat. And so if water quality is an issue, they're exposed to it for a greater length of time. After they do their spawning and lay their redds, then the fish emerge from their redds, spend a couple more years in freshwater. And these are generalities. I mean, they could spend 1 year, they could spend 3 years, they might sometimes even spend more, but that's sort of the general life cycle that we see of them. And so in that 3-year time period, again, they're in the water column, and if water quality is an issue, they have a greater length of time that they're in poor or fair habitat, and it reduces their ability to fulfill the rest of their life cycle. And I'm kind of jumping a little bit ahead, but the main point that I'm trying to drive home is this is why our agency is working on multiple levels, or I guess even more specifically myself in general, trying to work with local stakeholders, the federal government, the state level, the local and county folks to try and improve water quality within the Salinas to meet all these things that we're concerned about, which is mainly that the fish are exposed to a greater risk of exposure from poor water quality conditions. And again, this can be, we call pollutants, this could be a whole number of different things. It could be dissolved oxygen is low in the system, it could be sediment, it could be pollutants that come from heavy metals, pesticides, a whole bunch of different things. So as I explained as a young kid in a class, I don't think it was really quite appropriate, but it made a point. I was trying to explain to him why we'd be so concerned. I said, well, it's like this. One cigarette won't kill you, but a whole pack for every day for the rest of your life eventually will. And what we're trying to do is make sure you're never really exposed to any of it at all. And he finally kind of clicked on. He's like, oh, okay, I got it. That's why water quality is a big concern for the fish. Is, yeah, if water quality is not good one day, it's not the end of the world. But if it is every single day of your entire life, it makes it really difficult to grow up strong and be healthy. And so this is my last slide. The reason being is I want to make sure we left enough time for questions and answers at the end, but also I want to make sure that I left enough time for Rob to kind of talk about how he's dealing with the Ag Order and Water Quality Act and Endangered Species Act on a management level. And these are just some things that we kind of see repeated, the kind of buzzwords that you see, but this is a lot of the stuff that is kind of being trying to implemented in these management practices, reduce, reuse, recycle. This is from taking shorter showers, doing zero-scaping on your lawn, reducing the amount of laundry detergent. I mean, every single thing you can think of. Recycle as much as you possibly can, batteries, car batteries, oil, all that kind of stuff. Some other things that we see is also improve the riparian and floodplain habitat. And that's pretty open for interpretation, because when you say improve, you have to know what the conditions are and what fish or wildlife species really need to know what it is currently and what it needs to get to in order to maintain those populations and recover the species. There's also the fact that on the Nacimiento and the San Antonio, we have two large reservoirs operated by Monterey County Water Resource Agency, and how those reservoirs work can also help kind of reduce the pollutant levels in Salinas itself. So there may be some options that are on the table to dialogue with them about trying to release water at certain times of year to reduce the amount of contaminants that are in there. And then the last one is bioremediation. Those are your vegetated treatment or treated wetlands, bioswales. This goes on a number of things that you can think of. It's something as simple as a parking lot has enough cars that drip oil and everything else that when it rains, all those oils wind up into the drainage system that they have, the sewer systems. Well, where does that all go? It pretty much doesn't go to a wastewater treatment plant. Most likely discharges straight into a stream or river. So here it hasn't, I know it rained recently, a couple weeks ago. When it did, all that stuff, all the oils and stuff that were from cars was building up all over summer. Got enough rain, there's enough flow to actually convey that down into the stream. If that was all transported into some small little bioswale where it could just sit and the vegetation itself could actually suck up a lot of those oils and take a lot of the nitrogen and everything else that's in those chemicals, then by the time it actually is released back into the fresh water, it would actually be an improvement to some degree. It's not perfect, and you wouldn't want to drink it, but at least you know it's better than what it was prior to doing something like that. So there's a lot of options on the table. We don't necessarily have the clear vision of exactly what that is, and I think that's kind of why I'm honored to kind of come to this group today and talk about, well, here's some things that we're dealing with, and here's things that I'd like to, maybe we could all kind of work on collaboratively and see carried out further forward. So with that being said, I'm actually going to turn it over to Rob and let him talk more about what he's dealing with on the local level. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate what Devin said about an honor to be here, and I want to thank the Central Coast Pioneers for putting on this conference, and then I'd like to thank Devin for asking me to participate and share my perspectives. What I'd like to do now is bring up the map. This map that you're looking at is the original grant deed map that when my great-great-grandfather, 6 generations removed from me, was granted this ranch as part of the Spanish land grants. So this is what it looked like 150 years ago, and it's nice to give you guys, this is the Monterey Bay here on the left, and this is what you have is the Salinas River. And so what we're basically looking at here, over in here is, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Salinas, but Highway 68, where the river crosses Blanco Road. And so you can follow the rivers, it traces up. And what's nice about this map is you see tributaries in the alluvial floodplain. Up in here you see some hills, and how they laid out the ranch at 7,500 acres. It's the Rancho Potero y Mojocojo por la Sagrada Familia. So at any rate, they put houses along the river for families to farm in. This is a very diversified ecosystem that became a farming system, and there was cattle, dairy, vegetables. You had trapping of otters and beavers. And this was kind of farmed this way or worked this way up until the early 1900s when industrialization started coming along. So the railroad was put in. You had some roads starting being built across this. And so what I'd like to do now is bring up the map as it exists today. And this is the map that shows what I work with as far as growers. Okay, here we are today. You can see the Salinas River, which no longer bends up it used to curve up and follow up the coastline up to Moss Landing. Well, that was breached in the earthquake in 1906, so now the mouth of the river is just a channel that goes into Monterey Bay. But you can see, out of that 7,500 acres, my family and relatives still owns about 2,000 acres, and it's spread out amongst many people, 6 generations of property transfer. Really diversifies the ownership. What I've done is I've worked to on behalf of the owners to kind of create a unified voice as we go and talk to the other stakeholders in the area. So each one of these ranches where you see a different grower represents a different parcel or a different ranch. Ranch sizes typically range from 40 acres up to about 320 acres. This ranch right in here is even smaller. These are smaller parcels. So this is 1 ranch, 2, 3 ranches in there. The Pizzini Ranch, we call it Twin Bridges, and there's an interesting anecdote there related to Devon's work. Back in mid-90s, they thought they would just stock the Salinas River with steelhead, so they dumped, I don't want to say dump, but they put a whole bunch of steelhead in right at the Twin Bridges Ranch, I think 2,000, and really just expected them to flourish, but there was no follow-up as far as monitoring or tracking, so I really don't know what happened to those fish, but at least it was an attempt at something. So as we look at Devon's mandate of replenishing our steelhead population and getting it off the endangered species list, that should that occur, and that's what we're trying to advocate, and it's going to, what that means is that there's basically a healthy river, and for there to be a healthy river, there has to be healthy farming practices along the river all the way up to the Arroyo Seco area where the steelhead are spawning. So primary focus of my work is what's going on in here, how the management and farming practices on these ranches interface with the ecosystem, how we can continue to better our practices to further efforts of Devon and other such initiatives to create a very healthy and robust community of agriculture and commercial. The city of Salinas is up here, or actually Castroville, and then Salinas is over here, and so you're looking at population of maybe 250,000 at any point in time. Marinas over here. So, so you have to integrate the residential, the agriculture, and then blend it into a cohesive ecosystem management set of services that do serve the community. There's probably within this area, there's many growers, and there's fewer grower shippers, what we call grower shippers, who are the lifeblood of the agricultural community. And this is the prime alluvial floodplain. It's probably the richest soil in our country, and the products we grow here are distributed throughout the country. I've been in it for personally 30 years, since I started with Tanner and Annell Company back in '82, and I've seen the development of the marketplace for these products, and it's changed dramatically over those 30 years. We used to ship a lot by rail car, and they'd go to terminals in Chicago and New York, and then from the terminals, they get distributed locally through brokers and things like that. Now we're going more directly to the consumer through the large retailers, your Costco's and your Walmarts, Safeway, Winn-Dixie, which is pretty much those stores there account for probably 80% of the fresh vegetables consumed in the United States. And how we go about producing those vegetables is really part and parcel with what we're doing here. I'd be happy to share with you guys any of the questions you might have related to the agricultural practices here. What are your concerns? So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to ask. And I'm also involved with several environmental initiatives that focus on ecosystem services, wetlands restoration. I'm working with the Central Coast Wetlands Group on identifying key points along the sloughs. Like here's a slough in here that you see running on the edge of the ranch parcels, that putting in these wetlands treatment facilities that can take the runoff water that's so concerning to everybody and the focal point of the ag waiver, and reducing the loads, the TMDLs that Devin spoke to, treating it and then passing it along in a better state than you received it. So if you do have questions, just put your hand up. And
I can talk really loud.
okay.
I'm wondering about the Salinas River, how historically, like in Paso Robles, there's no water in it.
Right.
So is that the way it always was? Is that the only way it is in some seasons, or?
Depend on the rain. Now, the Salinas River is an underground river, and 95% of the river is the aquifers underneath. So we only see euphemistic tip of the iceberg, and underneath you have an 800-foot aquifer and a 400-foot aquifer, then a 150-foot aquifer. What we did in here, we used to have wells. In 1996, I believe, we brought online the Castroville Seawater Intrusion Treatment Facility, so every ranch I have in this area is serviced by the treatment facility. So in essence, we're taking reclaimed water from the Monterey Peninsula, tertiary water, treating it, and then distributing it through a pipeline back on the crops. In the meantime, we've shut down all the wells, so we're no longer pumping there and overdrafting the aquifers, which has really helped significantly the issue of seawater intrusion. And I would like to see, personally, more treatment facilities built in the Salinas Valley and less pumping of the aquifers, because that health of the aquifers, that especially the 150-foot aquifer, that gets into drinking water, and if it's polluted, it's not good for irrigation. So we really, the water underground is a huge concern. So getting back, even though you may not see any water in the river, it's there underneath.
So how did the steelhead get up the river?
How did the steelhead get up the river?
I can speak loud enough. It is on. Okay. So there's, in California, especially in this part of California, we have basically kind of almost two cycles. There's wet and dry, and we're getting into the wet season. And if you notice in the upper Salinas and around Paso Robles, when it rains, it pours. And so there are these narrow opportunities in the main stem of the Salinas River to get up into the tributaries, which are the Arroyo Seco, the Nacimiento, and even other portions of like San Luis Obispo County, which is Tascadero Creek, Trout Creek, San Marcos Creek, these other places. So when it rains, there's just enough continuity from the headwaters all the way down to the main stem that there's a very narrow window for them to come all the way up and also to go all the way back out. And another point to point out about that is with the Monterey County Water Resource Agency, they have the operation of the 2 reservoirs on Nacimiento and San Antonio, and the way they operate it is to actually release water during certain times of year to make sure that fish can move in and out of the system, as well as recharge the aquifer for irrigation purposes for agriculture. So when you're looking at Paso Robles right now and it's dry, you're going, how are Steelhead even able to get up here? And it is, the Salinas River is probably one of those unique river systems. It's in California where it does go dry, and it does pose a lot of management issues and concerns about how do you deal with something when it's dry 90-something% of the time, but then when there's finally water there, how are fish able to utilize that and move through it effectively to be able to complete their life cycle? So yeah, it isn't like, and we run into this a lot. I think a lot of folks are familiar with dealing with more of the North Coast streams like the Eel River, the Smith River, where there's always water there. And a lot of the things that I'm working with even the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board is how do we take these policies that were developed for Northern California, where there's lots of rain and there's trees and everything else, and apply something that's actually more befitting to this region when we have dry years and wet years more frequently than the normal. So yeah, it is a challenge. And it's also a lot of education for folks too. And they're not used to seeing the Salinas River as a river. They think of it as, you know, a dry river channel 95% of the time.
Yeah, I'm just going to add that, you know, when I go back and review and read the history of what was occurring 150 years ago when my grandfather was managing this land, there was a lot more water. There's no question about it. The alluvial nature of the soils tell us that, you know, there was ongoing regular flooding cycles, that we're kind of getting away from that, but you know, but we're able to replicate what transpires when a flood occurs and how the soil's replenished through modern technology and water management systems. Because flood control is a huge issue for us, and it works hand in hand with the pollution control and management of the river. Any ranch owner is going to want to make sure that his ranch is protected from erosion that occurs due to flooding along the river and things like that. That's where riparian buffers and things like that can really benefit the ranch and also add back into the ecosystem goals for a given ranch. When it comes to the ag waiver, I personally would like to see a watershed approach rather than this looking at each individual ranch. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the way they've assigned to tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Now the big issue is, well, what tier do you fall in because of all the associated costs? If you're in tier 3, you're going to have one set of requirements for a ranch, and if you're in tier 1, you probably don't have anywhere near the costs that you're going to have if you're in tier 3. Well, if you look at these ranches here, these are all separate ranches. Combined with this ranch, they're farmed as a unit, but you know, when I got this one in tier 3 and this one in tier 1, so you got to go and allocate resources to this ranch, but have monitoring of all the ranches. It's really a challenge. My whole goal is the health of all the water coming off all the ranches. So personally, if I could participate in this design, which, you know, as a landowner, nobody's asked us what our thoughts are on this stuff anyways, but yes, sir.
We have a question here first. Sorry, I'm trying to do them in order. So I'll bring you the mic in just a second.
Thank you. Right along with this subject matter, Mike, I have a question for Devin. Since what you've told us is that basically there's inconsistency is in the Salinas River year after year. We have some dry times, and yeah, we know historically it could be dry for a long time, sometimes for a few years in a row, and sometimes it's flowing water for a few years in a row. With that being said, how can you make a timing of the study of the steelhead spawning as far as being able to use this river for that, or do you need to just use some other rivers further north to be able to determine then what is the timing for the spawning of the steelhead, and how can we implement that to this river? How will you be able to implement that, knowing the inconsistencies of this river? Thank you.
Sure. One of the great studies was done by Ship Haveloff and Taft in 1954 on Scott and Waddell Creek, which are in Santa Cruz, and they studied intensely on the salmon life cycle in California, and then and again, sort of going back to that cartoon picture I had earlier, generally speaking, fish usually migrate from December all the way through till June. When I worked up in Central Oregon, we would see fish migrating even earlier than that, just because there's, again, more water, so there's more opportunities for them to do so. That being said, that's sort of a generality, and then it starts becoming a little bit more specific. In the Salinas, there are years like last year was a dry year that was classified, I guess categorized is better, classified. And in that, there was only a few sort of episodic events, meaning a couple of rain events where there was enough opportunity for fish to move through. So when we say, yeah, they move from December to June, that doesn't mean that there's this continual belt of fish moving one way and the other way. It's these sort of infrequent events where all of a sudden everything is connected, and fish are basically sitting in Monterey Bay waiting for that chance, and they know. I mean, this is just kind of going from my own experiences of tracking fish, is as soon as the rains come and they start seeing the peak of the storm event kind of going down, that's when they're moving through. And this is why we've been so concerned about making sure that when there is that chance for them to get up and move into spawning grounds, that they have it, and it's not, as we call, truncated. It's not shortened down to going from 10 days to 2 days. So there, and then again, the other part of your question was, there are those years, and probably way back in the past, where fish didn't actually even use the Salinas. It's not a given that they use it every single year, especially in critically dry years. You know, there's dry years and then there's critically dry years. So when we've had like the drought of 1987 and 1992, there's less chance for them to actually make it into the system in some of those years because it's so dry in those areas, which just really goes further back to my concern is when we finally do get those events where they can move, it's really important because we haven't seen them come into the system for maybe 1 or 2 years, and that third year, now's a chance for them to repopulate the entire watershed, and if the opportunities aren't there, we could lose the entire species like that. So that's why we're really kind of concerned about those things, but they do make it. We've seen the evidence of that.
I'm going to follow up with, I think this is an opportunity to use innovative designs and research on how we can create more surface water capacity on the river. Right now, when the Nesamiano Reservoir does its releases, most of the water released will go out to the ocean underneath through the aquifers, but there is opportunities to create storage capacity for surface water on top of the river. We've put a rubber dam in down here, which during the winter months before the growing season, we can raise the dam up and capture about 12,000 acre-feet of water in a reservoir that sits on the river. And when they designed it, they worked with NOAA and engineered it such so that it was a steelhead it was an operative opportunity for them to actually do some rearing, I believe, and also seamlessly pass back and forth through that by creating more width in the river and also being able to take advantage of the tidal nature of the river too. It moves. When it comes back 3 years later, it might not be in the same spot it was before, but by creating more storage capacity along the river, you're just creating more water, more surface water. Yes, sir.
So I have a comment, but first I have a preface. In San Luis Obispo County, a ranch is generally for cattle
Right,
on dry land.
right,
In your part of the world, a ranch is for cool weather row crops,
correct.
broccoli, lettuce,
Cauliflower,
spinach,
celery, yeah.
that sort of thing. Now, don't presume that everybody in the room is aware of the contentious history with regard to the landowners and the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, or that they know for how long that contentious history has existed and for how long it took to get to where we are now, which was a momentous decision in May of this year, was that right?
Yeah, March.
March.
Right.
And two, I will skip an adjective, days worth of hearings in San Luis Obispo
Right.
County. And then what the staff has had to do in terms of propagating enforcement, which are the orders that you mentioned.
Right.
So if you could give us just a couple of minutes to summarize, because it really is a very big issue for both counties.
It certainly is a big issue, and I put this ag waiver in the larger context of water management. You have your water supply needs, which is for us it's Nacimiento Reservoir, San Antonio Reservoir, and then it's management of the Salinas River, and it's management of those underground aquifers. Then you got on your on-farm management practices. Are you furrow irrigating? Are you sprinkler irrigating? Or have you gone into drip? You know, and what are your practices there? So what leaves our ranch, the discharge coming off the ranch, has to be optimized, just like our supply has to be optimized, and we're looking for efficiencies. And one of the things that we've done to manage these ranches is we've made huge investments in tiling systems. Now, I don't know how familiar you guys are with tiling systems, but basically French drains that serve multiple benefits, but one of the best benefits, you can move the water around on a ranch, and then so if you do have a discharge point, well, it's a focused discharge point, and you know that 99% of your water is leading a certain part of the ranch, is just not dispersing everywhere and being passed on to your neighbor. So, you know, our on-farm water management practices, how we work with the county on supply, making sure that the releases for the reservoir are coordinated with Devon's group, and also a big issue is who's doing the pumping and where they're pumping and how they're affecting the river when we're pumping. I know for the 100 miles from Spreckles down to the Arroyo Seco tributary, you know, there's a lot of pumping going on there, and you know, I'm only the recipient of the water that's come down from upstream. So whatever those guys are doing affects us, and their nitrates affect us totally. You know, I mean, the nitrates can be in the water that we're receiving to use to irrigate. So if we're irrigating with high nitrate content in the water, then, you know, then that's affecting our yields and everything else. So, you know, we want a very healthy water system. The ag waiver, the process to me, and I've worked on several projects, including the rubber dam and the CCIP. I look at, there's 4 basic stakeholder groups. There's the landowner growers, there's the environmental stewards who are looking to protect the ecosystem. There's the research groups, which is Cal State Monterey Bay, Cal Poly, UC Davis. We rely heavily on these universities, on their research for application out here. And then you have the governmental agencies is the 4th. And I separate the research from the governmental agencies, which is Devin's group. So these 4 groups have to work together. And it should be a collaborative process, not a contentious process. And the way you get collaboration is you need to get buy-in from the beginning amongst all the stakeholders and have it be a true collaboration where everybody's ideas are vetted, and then ultimately that's reflected in the regulatory mandates that are held down. So at least if you know you're a part of the rules as they're being written, then you have a better understanding of how you need to comply with them. I'll tell you what, for one thing, the landowners on this ag waiver were really left out of the process. The growers, there's a transparency in the ag waiver between the grower and the landowner. So whatever goes on this ranch, say you have a grower here, and then you have the landowners behind it. Whatever the growers do, the landowner's liable for. So and also, it's really important to realize that the landowners are paying the taxes that support all this effort. So at the end of the day, if there's going to be any type of assessments or anything else, those costs are carried by the landowner along with the operational costs that the growers are going to occur, because the growers, as their costs go up, they're going to come back and look to the landowner for some concessions there as far as the price that they're renting the land. So any way you look at it, you got to have the collaboration amongst these various entities. And it worked really well. I thought that when we got the CCIP project built up, I thought there'd be more treatment facilities coming online so we could take reclaimed water and use it for other applications. It's, I was looking at this rubber dam technology and thinking, hey, you know what, that might carry further up the river and create more storage along the river, because this one it's on the whole been very successful. It's created 12,000 additional acre feet of fresh water that can be infused. We can also take in the discharge water and route it back into the treatment facility, so you're actually reusing water over and over again. The breakdown occurred because there wasn't the upfront dialogues and then a cohesive blending of all the various ideas. So when they came up with the ag waiver and issued the order in March, 95% of those affected really didn't know what to make of it or how to deal with it. And I saw a draft, I guess back in February of 2010, I want to say, one of the first drafts that they took on it, and there were some things in the draft which made so little sense to me that I kind of lost a connection with the people who were writing the draft, because I'm saying, well, these guys obviously haven't come up and looked at our properties, because they wouldn't have, you know, this wouldn't even be an issue, you know, which things that they're putting in. But be that as it may, you still have to regroup, and now they're in the process of, I guess an appeals come down, and so they're reworking it and going to come up with something new. But still, it's all going to, the brass tacks are going to be the economics of how much it's going to cost to implement this waiver, and then what the benefits are going to be back to the community as a whole, you know. And that's why I love what Devon's doing, because we can count fish, and if we go from 10 fish to 20 fish, well, that, you know what? To me, that's a success. And anything, you know, we can do to create a steelhead population that exceeds the expectations of Devon and his group would be a really big success. So any chance that I get in talking to the growers and working on like these restoration, wetlands, riparian things, and make sure it's in concert with what Devon and his group's going to do, then there's an opportunity for success. So.
I just have a couple things to add on to that. One of them, again, back to that depiction I showed of EPA to the state board, then onto the Regional Water Quality Control Board. The way that whole process works, whereas EPA would be the one that would be working, you know, in the state of California to deal with these issues. Instead, it's the Regional Water Quality Control Board has to provide that information back to at a federal level. And the head of EPA, more or less the way the act is written, has to sort of approve what our water quality standards are and how we go about implementing, whether it's the ag order, TMDLs, all these other things. And then kind of just to capture the last piece of what Rob was saying was, I was in a meeting one time with somebody who says, yeah, I can't understand why we're spending all these thousands of dollars for just 2 fish. And we went around the room and we were kind of talking about something else, and I finally I said, you know, I'm really glad you said that. And he kind of looked at me like, why? And I said, because that's exactly what my issue is. I'd like to be spending very few dollars for lots of fish. Right. And until we get to that point, right now, yeah, we are in this place where everyone's got their own interest in what they're trying to look for as far as the future. And if we're all working in sort of a vacuum and speaking at each other, not with each other, and that's kind of why I'm so glad we have this Central Coast Pioneers, is you are bringing people from different interest groups into the room and starting to go through that dialogue of, well, what is it really that we need and what are we looking for? And I've had probably some of the most enlightening experiences from going out with people from the Salinas River Channel Coalition who do floodplain management, and just driving around with them and looking at what their concerns are and what they're working with, and then for me to sit there and explain to them, well, here's what my concerns and what I'm looking for, and you'd actually be surprised. There's a lot of commonalities. There's some things we just obviously can't agree on everything, then that's just human nature, but in a lot of ways we walked away feeling like, well, we have a shared vision. How we go about doing it's a whole different thing, and that's what I think was one of the issues with the ag order. When I first came on, I didn't know much about it. I didn't know much about what the politics were, but that's what I heard was, it was as though it was written and nobody had a chance to really even speak and be part of it and sort of, develop it together rather than here's what you're going to do from here on. So I think if it was done differently, it might have had a different, been a little bit more palatable for folks.
Are you wanting to add before the next question? Because I know you're actually a speaker. Do you want to add? Do you have a question?
Okay. This is a quick question. I'm curious. A couple questions. Do you find any buildup in the TMDLs from using the recycled water? Is there enough? They have more rain down in that area than up here. Is enough rainwater to leach out anything that builds up, especially if you're using drip? And if you're not, and congratulations on using the recycled water. I think that's absolutely wonderful. Are you noticing an improvement in the riparian aspects of the sloughs or anything else because you're not pumping?
The answer to the last question about the sloughs, because we're not pumping, I'm going to say yes. Though I will say that we suffered a setback with the spinach crisis in 2008, where the food safety backlash was stuff that we're kind of forced to go out there and clean out all the riparian vegetation in the sloughs, but I've seen it coming back, and then I've also seen the up in the Malera Ranch up there, up in here, in this triangle here, there's a wetlands treatment. It's that the Central Coast Wetlands Group's doing, and I've had the opportunity to watch that evolve and get the data points from that, and it's been very successful.
Again, I'm still only dealing with a few fish in the Salinas, so I probably would need a lot more, and hopefully that would be one piece of it. But there's constraints, and I always, when I talk to people, I go, well, here's what I need, and here's what I want, and here's what I need, and the constraints are, what are the river dynamics there, what are the social dynamics there, what are the land use practices there, it starts layering it down. I go, well, somewhere in there is that fine line of balancing things. We can't go back to 1642, it's 2012, let's move forward and figure out what can we do, and that's where Rob and I have kind of worked together really well. Is a lot of stuff he's doing fits in with what I need, and so I promote what he's doing, and it helps me out in the long run, and so it's kind of a symbiotic relationship that way.
Very good. If I could continue that. So the fish, whether they're steelhead or salmon, have different needs, whether they're going up the river or need a place to get stronger to go out into the ocean. And there are strategic points along that river system for various aspects of their life cycle. You made my second point very easy, and that is that have we really looked at the entire river system in the context of a river management plan that tries to bring all of this together, these 4 different entities that you talked about?
Right.
Are we
Yeah.
talking to one another in
Well-
any kind of way that says that we have a desired future condition that we're trying to create for the river?
In 1999, the executive director of the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary, her name was Holly Price, put together an excellent strategic rural land plans for the Salinas Valley watershed, and I use it to this day on looking at issues related to TMDLs, but she did a great job of identifying these groups and specific groups, Monterey Resource Conservation District and the Cal State Monterey Bay, the people who really could do something, and in this strategic plan laid out how these groups could work together with the State Water Resource Board and the Regional Water Resource Board and the landowners, how stakeholders could get together and work. And unfortunately, about 2005, 2006, and by 2007, the dynamics that started to be put into place by that strategic plan fell by the wayside. I saw various groups go back and regroup and isolate themselves, and then come back and put their attorneys out to represent them on everything. And we have way too many lawsuits related to all this stuff now. That's first and foremost is getting those sifted through to at least there's a legal platform that we move forward on. I've seen more water-related lawsuits filed in the last 3 years than I saw in 30 years. And it's mainly due to this ag waiver stuff.
Water-related lawsuits are endemic in California.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But on this level, if the local community in the watershed can solve 80% of the problems and leave the balance of 20% to the lawsuits, but now we have 100% of the problems in the hands of the adjudicators.
And I was just going to actually say, being from Central Coast and then actually going to Oregon thinking I was going to have more fish, more water, less issues, it's the same thing there. I mean, even if you have a river that's flowing at 10,000 acres, people still are arguing over what 5,000 feet, cubic feet per second should be going to, and who's got the water rights to it. It doesn't change, and it's whether you're in the Northwest, the Midwest, the Southeast. I mean, I've been exploring more about water quality issues and the politics behind it. It goes pervasive through any land that you're on. You start looking and stuff back into the East Coast and Tennessee Valley Authority. That there's a whole, case study on that. But you had one more question.
I do, and that is that we could throw up our hands and just continue to say that, and I hope we don't. I do hope we find a way to work together on this, and that leads me to my last question, and that is, is there a need for a science symposium on the Salinas, a science management symposium? Have we ever had one in the last 20 to 30 years that focuses on the Salinas with these different entities? And can we have those fairly regularly so that people are talking about these kinds of things? Could you comment on that?
I think I think there's been starts and stops all along the way. There's been Central Coast, Watershed Institute, CCOWS, which is a sort of a sanction off from CSUMB. They got started on some of this stuff. But I know that there's UC, I mean, you listed off some of the researchers already.
No, I don't think that what the science symposium should be a collaboration between Cal State Monterey Bay, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, Davis, UC Davis, because they've done a lot of work along with UC Berkeley in their College of Natural Resources and the cooperative extension. You take those 4 schools and entities and put together a collaborative research scientific symposium, integrate it with the GIS work that you guys are doing and the GIS work that they have, and you could start moving things along very rapidly. But it's very important that our governmental agencies and the regulators listen to these people, listen to this science that's being put forth. I've read so many good research papers that never make it into implementation because there's really no way to do it. As a matter of fact, the group I work with at Central Coast Wetlands and research scientist Mark Los Huertos from Cal State Monterey Bay came down to San Luis Obispo in March just trying to be heard by the regulatory board, and were not even given the opportunity to present their research or integrate it into the ag waiver at that time. We're hoping that at least it can be kind of backdoored into the regulatory process, because I'd like to see I have plans on the drawing board to put these engineered wetlands in strategic areas in here. Just pilot projects, we can start gathering data, and if it's anywhere near the type of results that they've achieved on the Malera Ranch, well, we could have a pretty comprehensive treatment system, at least throughout this critical region, that addresses 80 or 90% of the issues.
And coming from another, as I can't speak for the water board, but I can also speak for NIMS, coming from another regulatory agency side, I mean, we are always looking for the data, because for the most part, all we have right now is 303D list, which just says we have issues, but we don't know why. And so when we start raising our concerns, all we can refer back to is this section of the river is listed for this. My whole presentation is, here's the beneficial uses, here's the life stage that we're worried about. We don't know exactly to what extent that there is an issue. We don't know what is occurring, what's the science that's driving behind it. We just know that that's sort of housed within the water board. And so we've been, Rob's coming from one direction, the science group's coming from another direction, and I'm coming from another direction, all saying, we need to all kind of sit in a room almost this size and start hammering out some of these issues so that we're more effective at my job, they're more effective at theirs, and then we can actually start implementing some of these things that, as Rob said, if he's got engineered wetlands, I'm all in support of it. So, let's start trying to get past sort of the history and start moving further forward with the kind of the positive actions that we can do. So.
Right.
We are at time, but I acknowledged one more question asker. So let's hear his question if you don't mind, and then we'll end this.
Less a question and more an insert. I'm with the Resource Conservation District of Monterey County, and we're part of the Regional Water Management Group for the Greater Monterey County Integrated Regional Water Management Plan, and we're with the Central Coast Wetlands Group and other entities, private and public, attempting sort of a water resource project coordination process that incorporates fact-finding. We're looking at the lower Salinas right now, but I see it as ultimately a model that we can build on, that starts from a place of trust and collaboration. And so if you want to know more, you can Google it, but also you can talk to me. My name's Paul Robbins.
Thank you, Paul. So we're at the end. Let's give a big round of applause to Rob and Devin, our panel.